For over a year, I had the privilege of chairing the ethical, legal, societal implications of the SPHN. And in many occasions, I've talked about the work we've done in our product, which is the framework for responsible data sharing. But I thought today, since many of you might have heard me speaking about our product, I would present more, I will speak more about our rationale and motivation and the thinking behind the framework. Now, if you look at these fancy maps of the World Economic Forum, they speak of the future of health and healthcare. And this future seems to be made of the nodes and then the little pieces in the outer circle. And if you look at the closer at the nodes, you'd see 6 elements, 3 of which are very relevant to what we're discussing here today. Precision medicine, data, likely ethics and identity, and there are a few more, and all of them have something to do with data. So no matter whether we like the story with the data, whether we want to have more or less, we have a lot of data, and we keep generating automatically many. So if that is the future, the immediate question is, what about the present in terms of data? Where are we? And OECD undertook this exercise last year, looking at where countries are in terms of what they called data readiness. Meaning, are we ready to use data for the purposes that we want them in health and healthcare? And this is the result, because they looked at 2 different things. They looked at, are we technically ready? Operational standards, technical standards, and are we ready in terms of data governance? Are we ready to address the ethical questions that we all think about? And I think that they're very important. So you can see where we are on this map, and I've underlined Switzerland for that purpose. At the same time, there are a number of initiatives that are going on around the world, and now I'm not moving forward here, that are trying with different models and different visions to actually develop those standards or develop the conditions that will allow data readiness to get there so we can have access to data for developing the future health. These are some examples, there are many more, and although they vary in many ways, I'd like to point out that they have one thing in common. Their message often is that they need to build trust, that they need to present trust, create a trustworthy environment for the data to be used and accessed. And there are 2 ways to think about trust in those initiatives. One is as a self-serving goal. Well, if I get a trustworthy environment, I'm going to do what I want. The second is an outcome. I'm going to do things in a way that the outcome is trustworthy, and therefore I can build and sustain trust. And for all of you that have been listening to the news over the last days, you know that trust and trustworthiness in the digital environment is not exactly the easiest thing to achieve. But in health and healthcare, I think we have a competitive advantage because, in general, there is still quite a bit of trust. But it is getting more and more complex because the systems become bigger, the scope becomes bigger, and the immediacy that is helpful to trust is getting lost in the cyberspace. Now, if we want to agree that trust is essential and trustworthiness is a goal, it's crucial to think that this goes through how we are going to deal with data, how we're going to process data, how we're going to access and handle them. And this is particularly relevant for data sharing, something for the scientific community has been struggling with for a long time, over the last 20 years or more, and yet we still need to clarify how to do it. 20 years later, many, many guidelines later, we're still trying to figure this out. Now, I'm coming back to SPHN and to the initiatives we have here in Switzerland, and you can read this slide vertically and horizontally. The initiatives in Switzerland are a bit different from the ones that I've showed you in the previous slide, and they're and other famous activities. They are, particularly SPHN, is incentive-based, is a stepwise approach that doesn't create a repository, but a dynamic network of data sources. And very importantly, what it aims to do is a cultural shift around openness and sharing. But it does that, hopefully, through the responsible data processing. And that is a crucial element, I think, for this entire initiative. Now, if I were to think in plain terms what is responsible data processing, in complex terms, it's a lot of legal instruments and a lot of theories. I think for what we need data for, it is that we get to a point where we can have the right access to the right user at the right time for the right purpose. And I'm paraphrasing from the slogan of precision medicine because I do think this is crucial for getting to the precision medicine's aid. Now, these 4 words are crucial in responsible data processing. It is the type of access, it is the kind of user, it is the timing, and very, very importantly, it is the purpose. And if they're not aligned, something is not exactly right. So getting this right, I think, is what we're trying to present and what we're trying to do also in the framework for the SPHN here. Now, again, I'd like to remind you that when we talk about data processing and data initiatives and data anything, there are 3 things that matter massively. Where the data are coming from, their provenance, who and how access is granted, who has access, how we get there, and very importantly, what's the output. And here are the ethical reasons for that. When we talk about provenance, where the data are coming from, this is because we need to respect values such as autonomy and privacy. If we talk about access, it is because we need to respect fairness, openness, and accountability. And when we talk about output, it is because it matters what is the benefit and matters very much who is the beneficiary. What we want is the beneficiary to be all of us. We want the health of the people to improve, and that is very important for justice. So this is the scheme that then we end up presenting in forms of process which secure or ensure that we have quality controls in place to assess the provenance, that we have access criteria that don't let the right user, the wrong user, to get access to things, and because we can have traceability and the right form of dissemination. So this is the thinking behind how we're trying to achieve responsible data processing in terms of our philosophy. But of course, in Switzerland, we're navigating a very dense legal landscape. We have laws that cover many, many different aspects of these initiatives. And the laws are just setting the bare minimum. They're setting the boundaries within which we have to maneuver. But within those boundaries, we still have to figure out the process. Sometimes in our framework, we do go a little further, because remember, we want to have this cultural shift that it says yes to access, but yes in a way that the access and use is right. We're not repeating the legal instruments because they apply anyway. We're just trying to navigate this legal terrain in a way that creates the cultural shift. And so what we ended up with in the framework is a fairly lean and simple set of principles. Many are familiar to those of you that have been in this area for a long time. Respect for persons, a core principle and value in research ethics. Respect and protection of privacy, which is absolutely essential, especially in the digital world. I don't think we can argue about that. We see it around us every day. We also promote the idea of data fairness, meaning that data that can be used for research purposes should be used for research purposes, provided that the right conditions apply. And that is because the understanding of knowledge is that knowledge is a common good that we all ought to contribute to. And finally, and very importantly, again, because we are in the digital environment, the principle of accountability. Now, in terms of the framework, those of you that you have seen it, what we do is accept those principles, and through those principles, go and derive specific guidelines. The principles are based on very large analysis of what's going on internationally, international instruments, national instruments, the law, and many other things that have been around for longer than the SPH and has been around. The guidelines aim to get researchers and users more specific help as to how certain things can be approached. Now, what also has been very interesting in this process, we're now finalizing the second version of the framework. We published the first version, which accompanied the first call of SPHN and PHRT. In the second version, we increased the scope to include data and specifically mention human biological material. We saw a very constructive dialogue amongst many parties, researchers, clinicians, hospitals, which is very positive. We saw synergies, and we saw convergence. So it is possible for people who may disagree about what is the right access to sit on the table and decide on what they can live with. And I'm very glad to tell you that at least just before finishing the second version in the next couple of weeks, we have right now SPHN, PHRT, and the Swiss Biobanking Platform signing off to this one framework with the 4 principles and the specific guidelines. I think this is a very important and positive step to the right direction, but also important to show that people sign up to the idea of a cultural shift through this increased responsibility. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.